Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Head of Europe and Middle East Policy at Openai, Sandro Gianella. Moderates the session, founder of Future Proof Society,
Always me.
Alessandro Tommasi.
Awesome. We need to review the walk-in sound, but it's fine. I was mentioning, well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for being here and welcome. Welcome to L'Aquila.
First of all, thank you for having me. And first, the excuse to be able to not speak Italian despite my Italian name. It's a big mystery, but thanks for bearing with me and with English. Appreciate it.
Symbol of time that are passing by, they gave me notes that are as big as my apartment, basically. They think I'm older than what I actually am. I was mentioning that we had dinner yesterday with some of the speakers and sponsors and people that were moving from your table, you know, like to get a cigarette or something. Everybody was like, oh my God, we are having such inspiring and deep conversation. It's fantastic. Sandro is from another planet, so fantastic. I'm from a very more low-level origin and ability. And so the first question that I asked you yesterday was, how do you succeed in interviews, meaning job interviews? Because I was so interested in your career. I know it was not planned and it's not common to, but you actually have running an incredible career in policy in the tech world. Can you go through it, and also not just to show off, but how you saw the tech world change in the last 15 years or so that you're in the policy and tech world?
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for the kind words. I'll have you introduce me and the music as well everywhere I go from now on.
Big fan. Big fan.
Yes, I think the way I stumbled into kind of being a translator between politics and technology is actually I work for an NGO and a foundation in Germany called the Heinrich Böll Stiftung. They are attached to the Green Party, and each of the political parties in Germany have sort of a think tank and do tank affiliated with them. And I remember the Google team at the time came to the leadership of the think tank and says, hey, we have the inventor of the internet in town in Berlin, and they would like to speak to your leadership. That was Windsurf. He invented the TCP/IP protocol back in DARPA and was one of literally the fathers of the internet. If you've watched the movie The Matrix, and the guy in the three-piece suit, that's him. Like, it's literally...
No, I met him through Google. Yeah, incredible.
And I was so surprised that it was hard to find, this was maybe 2008, 2009, it was actually hard to find senior policymakers who wanted to speak to him. And this was just something I remember. I was the beginning of my career, and I thought that can't be what the conversation should look like and needs to look like. And I've always been a really kind of strong, I always tried out every new piece of technology that existed, and I also always have been very political. And so I think my career was kind of fortunate to have Vint there, who then told me, I told them that, like, hi, I'm sorry, we organized a dinner, you know what it feels like, and it was kind of hard to get people in, and I felt really bad for the guy, because it's like, he's kind of a big deal. And he said, it's the story of my life to a certain degree. And he said one of the things he regretted with the team and the group who was there, academics who invented the internet, was they didn't, the narrative that they had and the understanding that this is going to really change our societies, that our societies are going to need to be future-proof for the internet, that there are weird things that are going to happen because all of a sudden the world is more connected than it's ever been. And he told me that he hopes that the next waves of technology don't make the same mistakes, and that we are having more public, more honest, more earnest, positive, critical, whatever the conversations need to be, and that really struck me at the time. And then I thought, well, how can I kind of be a part of that? How can I help bridge the gap between public officials, elected officials, and the people that are building the technology? Because they, as you know, they speak really different languages. By necessity, they can't speak the same languages, and they work at really different speeds. And so I think my career, the way I describe it, is mostly trying to bridge that gap in very different ways. And I spent about 6 years doing that at Google. I spent another 6 years at a company called Stripe with 2 Irish founders in the online payment space. and then the last 2, although it feels like 16 years at OpenAI trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's going pretty fast as a company, is it?
Yes.
I've heard about it a little bit. Do you consider yourself a tech guy or a policy guy now, like, or a sort of an interpreter, translator in the middle?
I think it's the translator in the middle, but I think what has changed with how we talk about AI and this technology shift that we're all living through at the moment is that it used to be an interpretation between very specific regulators and policymakers, you know, in the financial technology space who were dealing with payment flows, you know, and that's their job, that's what they're focused on, and you made sure that they understand and appreciate a different way of how payments can flow, and maybe different ways, and whether that was stable, you know, central bank digital currencies, the digital euro, but they felt quite focused conversation where the general public wasn't part of it and maybe didn't need to be at that moment. I think for now, which is why I'm so excited about what you guys are doing here and where we're having this conversation, it's not a conversation in the back room with 1 or 2 members of parliament or policymakers. I think what we believe really strongly needs to happen is a more public conversation, and we feel a responsibility as OpenAI to do that. We're still a fairly small company. We try to be in a lot of places.
I've seen smaller companies.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. But I think that's where I see myself almost more at the intersection between technology and society rather than technology and policymakers and regulators, because I think our elected officials are part of the solution and need to understand what is happening and act accordingly. But I think almost more importantly this time, all of us individually, as societies, as communities, need to understand what's happening, need to act accordingly, need to think differently. And I think I'm having fun doing that, but it also sometimes keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I'm sure about it. Let me remind a tutti quanti che se volete fare delle domande, e vi prego di farle, potete mettervi in fila dietro quell'asta col microfono, domanda anche in italiano senza nessun problema se preferite, e posso io tradurre, e così abbiamo a more broader debate with you, with questions. We'll get it in Italian. The whole summit that we're having in these 3 days is around this idea of this strategic autonomy, whatever that means or we want it to mean for Europe in the energy transition, the digital transition, and of course the new world order that's being built around us as we speak. So one of the discussion we had yesterday with the European Parliament Vice President, with Anne Applebaum, and also in the introduction that we had was, can we still dream, for example, in the digital transition of, you know, starting from your garage or whatever, in your backyard, and then grow up to one of the biggest company in the world? Is still that wave in technology? And question connected to that is, if the answer is no, are we doomed as Europeans in terms of we lost the train on AI, as lots of people, including Mario Draghi, basically are saying, and Draghi in his report says, well, probably we lost the window of opportunity is closed now, and we maybe should be doing something else. What do you see?
Yeah, I think there's never been a better time to build and start new things and new companies. I think if you look at, if you have people that are curious and that believe that they have agency, like they can just go ahead and change things, build new things. I mean, you and you guys are an example of that. And I say that more also in wearing my hat as an angel investor and being close to kind of a lot of companies who are just getting started. On the one hand, it feels like it feels for them like the possibilities are endless and it's hard to choose and you just need to get started. But the way I think about these AI tools, if you think about how much of a limiting factor having access to software developers was, or having access to financial analysts, or you think about as a company just starting out, or to lawyers, or all the things you need to scale up was intelligence that was limited in a way, because you needed to find the right humans who can help you out, and you needed to have the capital to have your financial analysts, you have software developers. And I think that will still continue, but I think the 0 to 1 to get started, these tools give you incredible agency to just start build things. I mean, you know, the term of vibe coding, you asked if I'm a technical guy. I'm not. I'm a social scientist by training who happens to work in technology companies. But I can now code, you know. I can, and also I'm also not a numbers guy. But if I now get a spreadsheet, I'm not as scared as I used to be. You know, I use these models to make sense of what I'm seeing, and they help me understand. They help me get started. Now the question of how you get to from I'm getting started, I have an idea, I have traction, I'm starting to see that I'm onto something, to do I really scale up? I think that's the thing where the Draghi report and the conversation that we're now having in Europe is needed, is urgent, and I think action needs to come. I do think that we sometimes still stand in each other's way, where we look at, you know, sovereignty for each country, for each regions, and I think we need to start thinking as one, as Europe. And I think if you talk to most companies that are scaling up, the reality is that they're European companies, but they also have software developers and partners in the US. There's an incredible ecosystem in Africa. And so I hope that the Draghi report and the actions that we're now seeing from the Commission and the Sunday speeches really translate into Europe feeling more like one market that allows us to scale. Because I do think, given how quickly everything is moving, if you're a Dutch company that builds just for the Netherlands as a market, I don't think you're going to be able to scale up. But I'm encouraged by the types of entrepreneurs and companies that we're talking to, that we're dealing with, that are thinking global from day one and that are coming straight out of university and using it feels so natural for them to have access to this incredible amount of intelligence that I think it's them who are going to write the future.
Yeah, well, lots of questions. First, let's say you are Mario Draghi or you are Ursula von der Leyen or whatever. You are in charge. Which one of those items, area, priorities would you choose? As computational power, energy, data protection, talent? Which would be the one where to invest more, you know, to put more of your focus? Which means, where are we as Europeans falling behind a little bit? Is it energy, data, yeah, computational power, talent?
I think maybe this comes from a belief and understanding that I think these models, whether it's ours or others, are going to continue to get better. They're going to continue to get more efficient and more effective. They're going to continue to increase in their ability to reason. And I think if you think through what that means, it's not like you're providing people with data or information that they have available. You provide them with a type of intelligence that has never been cheaper. And so I think if you think that through, I think it's going to feel much more like electricity than anything else. I think a lot of people are going to, or we all hopefully are, and more people will in the future utilize and access these technologies. And I think that's a good thing because it levels the playing field. And I think Europe should be playing that game. We're encouraged by Europeans are top users of AI. Sometimes, you know, I can say that as a German. The usual saying is like, oh, the Germans are hesitant, and you know, it's all the privacy concern. They're absolutely leaning in on using these AI tools for work, for pleasure, for all the things that they do. And so I think that leads me to energy, actually. If you think through what is the limiting factor going to be, if you think about sovereignty, if you think about can Europe really play at a global level, I see the speed and the determination with which other nations in other parts of the world are building infrastructure, are building data centers, are thinking through and funding novel ways to create abundant energy. I think if we don't play in that game, if we in 5 to 10 years won't have access to energy, it also means we won't have access to, or we won't allow our citizens to have access to the intelligence that's going to be available. So I think that is a problem that we need to solve. And I think then the other thing, which is maybe, you know, it goes from like way up here to the nitty gritty, but I think we still underappreciate how like little pieces of friction in getting started really add up. And I think that's to me a little bit the Draghi report, or when I'm speaking to policymakers, it's, you know, whether it's stock options, whether it's the ability to hire people in other markets, the ability to kind of sell products in different markets. Each and every one of these problems, when you describe them, is like, oh, but it took me 4 months, and here, and this is not digitized yet as a process. Usually they're like, yeah, but come on, you wait for another 3 months. I think if you add all of this up, it really like smother, I don't know what the right word is, it dampens the desire to start things and to do things. And so I think, unfortunately, because it's a lot of like nitty-gritty work, we need to keep reducing these pieces of friction in Europe that I think are still too many, and not necessarily, they're often unintended consequences or just results of the way we have been doing things, but I think we need to radically rethink on allowing people to get started easier, to scale easier, and they can be really small things, but I think they have a big effect.
Yeah. Oh, we already have a question. Vai, Steve. Microfono al centro per l'asta. Vai.
I can scream. Can you?
Oh,
Yes.
oh.
Okay, fine. It's good. My bad.
We'll repeat it.
Hi, Sandro. Thanks for the speech. I have a question. So part of my work is doing early child development policies. And we're hearing so much worry from parents of children of 0 to 8 years old about how do I engage with AI? How does my school do it? What should I do? How are you or others engaging with early education institutions, pre-K? What's kind of on the landscape in terms of how you're going to support that space specifically and what worries people? Thanks.
Super question, and also a personal one, given I have two daughters, 12 and 14. And so it's you can imagine the conversations about whether to use ChatGPT for homework is a particularly difficult one in the Gianella household. But I think we settled, maybe this is an example, and then I'll get to your question. We settled on, what I'm worried about is our current devices and the obsession on screens, I think is something that I worry about for kids and youth. What I don't worry about is her being able to ask questions and have tutors and teachers and the smartest people on earth on any subject that she desires available at her fingertips. I think it's an incredible time to be a young kid that is curious and has questions for the world. But I do think we need to work through schools and teachers and institutions and as parents to think about how can we deliver that in a way that we feel good about and we feel proud. The really simple hack I have is I have an old phone that has ChatGPT on, and I allow her to use it only in voice mode. So she's doing her homework, and the device is there, and if she has a question or comes across something, I have a system prompt that I have, so it doesn't directly give the answer, but she can ask. She's like, hey, tell me more about X and Y, or I'm struggling with this math question, or I need to prep for my presentation in school tomorrow. Can you give me some feedback? And it feels like she's not distracted by the technology. It more feels like a conversation that she would have with a teacher. And it takes some time to get used to that. And I would say as a parent first also, there are sort of things of like, well, but shouldn't she be having these conversations with a tutor and human beings? But I think if you think about how many kids in the world don't have access to that type of tutoring, to that type of explanation and discussion, I think that's where, I think kids, they are using these tools. So I think for us as a society and schools, when we have conversations with them, the question is, how can you help them use it in a way that increases their cognitive abilities, that keeps them curious? And we have a colleague that's focused just on education as a topic, and we've created a community of teachers and educators that are just sharing best practices. Because we were thinking about what's the, is there a big program we should launch and big initiatives we do? Actually, we just need to bring people together who've somehow figured out in their own community or school a good way to engage with that. And that's been really fascinating to watch, because one other thing we do is, one of the most fascinating things about working at Openai is to see the ways in which people are using our tools in ways and on topics that we could never imagine. Because, we're maybe 2,000 people, we have some amount of the imagination of the world within the company, but the world is a big place. And I think that's why we're trying to open ourselves up to find people who found a good way to do that and feel okay about it.
Interesting. Now, I'll give you the floor in a second, but what you just said struck me, because most of the time regulators look at the vulnerables one when they think about the regulation and so on, and when they think about those more vulnerable are young people, right? It's always the youth. But actually, from what you said, I think there's a huge need in educating actually parents, elder people, because they are in a responsibility roles. Yeah. You just have a very interesting scheme with your daughter, with your kids, but because you have good knowledge of how to handle this technology, right? if we don't do that, we don't focus on parents and elder people, we may see the inequalities in a sense even broaden up, because if your parents are able to manage technologies and blah, 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 maybe you can use them in a more aware and a more thoughtful way. But if the parents or adults in the room are not, then you're doomed. Huh? What do you think?
I agree. I think it's a really good point you're making, and we're seeing it in so many places. The other place that I think we see it is if you look at these statistics of number of SMBs or companies that use AI. The number is usually quite low. In Italy, it's something like 15 or 16% of small and medium businesses are using AI. And I said, well, who did you ask? And they asked the CEOs, the CTOs. It's like, well, we see the usage numbers of our tools and of many other tools. There definitely are more people that are using AI in your company. You just don't know it. Or you don't have the conversation with the young people and the folks coming out of university now. And I think that's almost the worst of all worlds, because then they kind of feel bad that they're using it, but it actually makes them more productive, it makes them more effective, it makes them better at their jobs, but they somehow have to hide it. And I think, I agree with you, I think from a regulatory and sort of for public officials, like what can we do, what is the narrative that we need to tell in order for our society to be future-proof and for this to go well? I agree. There are, of course, always things that are kids and youth related that we need to make sure as a company that builds these tools that the worst doesn't happen. But I think overall the sort of thought of like, oh, we really worry about them not knowing how to use these tools in a good way, I think you're right. I worry more about kind of parents, managers, people of a generation. I think we are sort of barely in the generation that still manages to kind of understand and go along with the technology, and it's a gap that I think is difficult to close, but at the same time, I think it is actually very accessible. Like, it is not a piece of technology like that is very hard to start to use, but I think it is harder to know how to use it well. And I think when I speak to elected officials, they still mostly see it as, oh, this helps me edit my emails. And you speak to a 20-year-old software engineers, like that's not how they're using these tools.
Yeah. Please.
Hello, thanks. So it's very fascinating the way you position yourself as like a translator between technology and society. I think all of us are seeing a very impactful storm coming on our society because of artificial intelligence on our intelligence. You mentioned like now everyone has access to a new type of intelligence. And I have a young sister. I've seen her workflow in doing homework. Like, guys, school is much easier with AI. Like, she doesn't care about reading pages. She just take a pic, put it on ChatGPT, and she gets back either an explanation, a schema. Like, oh, it's so cool, no? And like myself, like in my work, like when it comes to kickstarting something like a workshop, slides, brainstorming, anything, I start with AI. Like, it makes no sense to start from scratch. And I see ChatGPT as like the provider of template. Like, I don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. But
And the question is?
yeah.
Sorry.
What if we stop thinking without AI? So what if the future, like but also the present, is we think with AI? Like there is no way we have thinking process without this companion. I don't see it as a risk necessary, but I see this as something coming, very concrete, real, tangible, no?
Yeah, I think there's two. First of all, thanks for the question. I think it is these types of conversations that make this job so much fun and so interesting. Because as I said, this is where an interaction with society is relevant rather than just with elected officials. I think two things on that. One, as you say, the actual debate on whether it is a good or a bad thing for us to now have a thought partner, whether that's on work issues, medical issues. I see a lot of people who are also, you go into a difficult conversation with someone and a real conversation, and you try it out first, or you ask for advice and for help. And in many ways, there are, I think, a lot of ways in which we can use the technology that allows us to be more human and better humans, as abstract as that may sound. But I think it requires those building the technology and those using the technology to be really conscious about a potential world in which that doesn't go so well, and in which we kind of no longer want to, or have the ability to, or feel comfortable even in like thinking out loud with other humans. But I have a feeling that with each technology shift that we've had, we sort of allowed ourselves as humans to focus on things that we're good at, that we're predisposed to, that we're thinking about. And also one of the conversations we had over dinner yesterday was on a lot of times more people having more conversations with each other, I think would be good for the world, but we're sort of limited by the amount of time we can have conversations with each other. And I think that's something when you think about AI agents and us, like not only being able to interact with the technology as a thought partner, but to say like, hey, I want you, AI agent, to represent me towards someone else. And I think that will lead to almost better coordination and better ways in which kind of humans can exchange, can think with each other. I do agree that it's going to be a bit weird and a bit wild, and I think it requires a lot of thoughtfulness in how we build this technology. The last thing I would say on that is there's a document we call the model spec that I think is interesting to look at, which talks about and thinks about what are the traits and the values that these models should exist, so we as a society feel good about having most of us have these like pretty meaningful conversations with AI. And that's a document that we've made public because we wanted to be transparent about the system prompts and how these models behave, that I think we are always looking for feedback on that.
Thank you.
Please.
So I was part of the dinner last night and felt good to not be the science fiction guy at the table anymore. At least I was a good companion with Sandro. So I have a question about something we discussed yesterday night. So what do you think is the path towards abundance globally? So we discussed it later last night. And on the other hand, don't you think that like Europe, since we said probably we are behind on AI technology, we could at least focus on energy, which is the limiting factor to AI, at least until we get to abundance. And do you think like politicians, elected officials are smart and creative enough to understand what you guys are doing, or what AI path is going to be in the future? Because I don't think they are.
So maybe to spend one sentence on the term abundance, which some of you might have heard, but it's sort of I would say a school of thought in the Silicon Valley, but other places as well, that kind of thinks through, okay, if the models become cheaper, if AI becomes cheaper and cheaper, if we have more energy available, if more humans will be able to do more things with all of that, and if it will allow us to solve really, really hard problems that we currently haven't solved, from diseases to healthcare to other things, are we or can we enter an area of abundance where the limiting factor is sort of no longer going, like, there's going to be almost no limiting factors to what we can create, what we can produce, what we can consume. And I agree with you. I do think there is, if you think through all of the pieces that are in place right now, I have sympathy for the thought that this is going to allow us to build and create many more things, and it will lead to questions about what does it even mean to do work that is economically meaningful, what is society going to look like in a place of abundance. To me, I feel Europe has other things we should be focused on and solving right now that allow us to have a better way to engage with abundance once it comes. And so that's where I would focus right now. I do think policymakers and regulators, if I think about how, to your question, how the conversation changed from 2 years ago, 3 years ago to today, I think it has moved from a conversation mostly about risk and things that could be going wrong, that still is there, to a conversation about, well, what is society going to look like if everything goes well? And if we create this incredible technology, if we find a way to use it to solve problems that our societies really care about, what kind of society are we going to live in? And I think it is really hard to have a focused conversation on that, because I think if you think about the lifespan and the focus of policymakers and what they think about, it is hard for them to think that far out, even though I think, as we discussed yesterday, it might not be as far out. So it is a challenging conversation to try and focus policymakers that have so many more pressing problems right now, to have them think about, well, imagine a world in which all of these problems are solved. What should we be doing then? I feel that's a leap too far, if I'm being honest.
Should I?
Yes, quick questions, so we
Yeah,
can go
I
wrap.
actually have a tech question and a policy question, if I may. So the tech question is, you said there's never been a better time to build, but if we do get to AGI and we do get there quickly, and following OpenAI's own definition, so a system that does every kind of economically valuable work, how do you build a system that is, in a way, AGI-proof, that it's not a thin wrapper that, by the way, Sam Altman himself said, if you build a thin wrapper, we're essentially going to steamroll you. I believe he said that in a Bloomberg interview or something. So how do you build like a thick wrapper, something that can live in the future and be still economically valuable? And by the way, what are your timelines? That would be something nice to hear from you if you have a question to that. Paul's question is, I do share the general principle of developing somewhat in public, so sharing the insights that you gain as you go along, and to get the public accustomed to these systems and not sort of get out everything at once. But looking back at the whole sycophancy thing that happened last month, I believe you handled it pretty well with the postmortem, but I think in the future, if we do get systems like AGI that are more sort of part of the societal system, how do you even think about handling these sort of whoops moments? Wouldn't that be kind of worrisome? Should we be worried about that? How do you think about that? Okay. Thank you.
Two great questions. You keep me honest on time, by the way, if I'm meandering.
We go as far as we can.
And going for too long. On the first technical question, on like what should we build and what is future-proof, I think the things that I'm seeing currently that drive a lot of economic value is people that have a really deep understanding of a specific process or vertical, and they have an understanding of how AI can be used to do this thing better and differently, that to me isn't a wrapper. Whether that's the legal profession, whether that's in manufacturing, where you really have a group of experts that almost aren't building an AI company, but they're thinking about, right, Harvey is a good example. It's a company that the OpenAI fund has invested in, where they've they're all senior partners in a law firm, and they have set out to reimagine, well, what is a law firm even going to do and look like and be able to do in a world where these models get better and better and better. And it's not to say that I think it is future-proof that they will always be able to generate economic value out of it. But I think that gives you a much better shot than just thinking about what's the cool AI thing I can do, is what is the vertical that I really understand, what is the process I really understand, and can I move quicker than the established players to build something that is going to be the law firm of the future. If I imagine what the world will look like as these models get better, I think lawyers are not going to do the same thing that we pay them to do right now, but they might be able to focus on much more creative problems. They might be orchestrating these AI tools and AI agents in a way that's really effective and efficient. And so I think that would be the answer on the first point. On the second one, maybe that also requires like one sentence of explanation on what sycophancy is and what the issue was. So this was a couple of weeks ago where we had released a model that was basically liked their users too much, and so whatever you put into ChatGPT, it was
amazing.
This is amazing. It's the best idea. It's the best thing we ever had. And the interesting thing is, it also tells us something about humans. A lot of users actually kind of liked it, because it felt good to be reassured. But we fairly quickly realized that it was going in a direction that we didn't think matched with the model spec that we had put out publicly. So we decided to pull back the model and be really public about what had happened, why it had happened, because you're right. I think currently the stakes aren't low, but they're lower than they will be in the future. And so part of why we do all of these things so publicly, whether it's the model spec, whether it's our decision to pull back some of these models, is I think we as a company need to get better at doing that, and we need to build systems and governance to make sure it doesn't happen going forward, and to really make sure it doesn't happen when these systems are much, much more intelligent, and that's the whole conversation on alignment and super alignment. So I think you're right to say that we handle this one well, thank you, but also right to say that we as an industry and as a society need to really up our game to make sure that we understand and like measure how these models behave before we put them out.
Final question.
Hi, thanks. How you think we can defend our society against the weaponization of AI from all the states?
Against
Easy one.
weaponization of AI.
Yeah. Especially if you think about the supply chain attack that can easily be spotted in the wild, in the software space, then can be used in a small language model or so on and so forth.
So it's sort of a cybersecurity question.
Exactly.
Ah, okay.
To make them less
we have. I think this is where something being a dual-use technology is I think what's worth talking about, which is on the one hand, we are seeing these models for our own cybersecurity teams to allow them to be much better and much quicker at kicking bad actors out of the system and seeing things that I think before having these tools available, we wouldn't be able to see them. But at the same time, we also, of course, know that the bad actors now have access to the same tools and they're using them. And it is something we call the preparedness framework, where we look at a certain category of risks that we worry about, that we want to make sure we have a handle on, and cybersecurity is very high on that. So we do a lot of red teaming and a lot of kind of robust thinking about, is the gap, like, are the models that we're releasing really increasing the attack vector of these bad actors in a way that we as a society can no longer handle it? And it's actually the one area we do a lot of work with governments. So the UK has built this AI Safety Institute that is quite focused on this issue as well. So we also try to encourage more collaboration with public agencies that might be seeing threat actors that we're not seeing, to make sure that there's an exchange of things we're seeing. But it's a hard problem to solve.
Cool. Very, very quickly, because I know it's very hot and we need to go also to other panels, so very quickly.
Yeah, I'll be very quick, thank you. I was wondering, like, given your role as a bridge between technology, policy, and also society at large, like working to address the challenges lying at the intersection of these domains, how do you see the growing imbalance of power in terms of knowledge and skills between those who produce AI and those who passively consume it every day, like most of us?
Mm-hmm. I think maybe I would challenge how much we are. I think we are, of course, consuming it somewhat passively, but I do think this technology allows us to change and adapt it to the way that we want to use it. So if I think too often, I think people make the comparison to sort of this really passive, like scrolling through Instagram, social media. We just can't do anything about how this technology is sort of using us. I think the way that we're seeing a lot of people use these AI tools, whether they're open source models that they have on their laptop because they feel better about having it on-prem, or to use proprietary models like ours, is it is very easy to change the system prompt, or to give your ChatGPT a different persona, or to build your own GPT that has it behave very differently. I don't think it's a perfect answer to your question, and I think there, of course, always is a certain amount of power imbalance between companies that are building and consumers. But my hope is that I think, given how this technology works and how easy it is for a consumer to actually change the behavior of the model and the responses that I get, it feels like consumers are being more active. And also the other good thing is there's lots of competition out there. So, we're happy with every user that uses ChatGPT, but we also know there's lots of other tools and different tools out there and great models that are being built. I don't think that was the case 3 years ago, but I think a lot of people have caught up, so that while it makes it harder for the business, I think it gives us a better answer on the power imbalance, because I think there's more choice for consumers. There's more open source models that you literally can run on your computer now. We're also going to be releasing more open weights models in the future because we think that gives even more controls to consumer to literally have the model and fine-tune the model in a way that works for you rather than in a way that has been decided on how it should work for you by a company.
Awesome. Well, Sandro, thank you so much. Conversation was great. Time is over, but I know you're going to stay with us for a few more, so if you have more questions, feel free, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Ale.